See, it says past due, but I clicked republish 20 seconds ago, so it's not my fault. There we go. All right, well, gentlemen, welcome. Glad to have you here today as we continue to push our way forward into the various miracles of Jesus. Moving into kind of a new unit within John, John chapter 5, as we come off of both the wedding at Cana and the healing of the official's son, we move into something of a strange story. At least it has, I shouldn't say that. It's a very typical miracle in many ways. Typical miracle, I understand, is a little bit of an oxymoron, but it has some strange details. So we'll kind of hit that and touch on that as we do. But before we dive into that, are there any questions from last week? Wonderful. So I know we're a little short on our regulars here today. Steve is doing well. His surgery was yesterday. Danny's he had a cochlear implant installed, I guess. Yeah. So he'll be able to hear me now. No excuse. That kind of thing. I heard that he's listening to the doctors and he's listening to his wife, and I thought, well, if you listen to your pastors too, that's the trifecta, right? You got nothing else that you need to be doing, right?
If you can turn it off.
I would have no idea. And then Danny's will not be here because she is practicing for handbells, so I'm excited for her for that as well. Everyone else, I'm not sure. I haven't heard one way or the other about. So who knows? We might still have some stragglers coming in. But yeah, so before we dive into it, just to potentially clear the air, do you guys want to talk at all about what happened in Utah today? If you don't know what happened in Utah, we don't need to talk about it.
No, that's bad.
Yeah, is that something that we should be addressing here at this point, or no?
I mean, what can you say?
Well, I mean, there are definitely some things.
It shouldn't have happened.
Well, I think that's an obvious thing to say, right? I think that our country should have done it before, I think. But we need to, as a nation, take a serious step back in a couple of areas. One of them is how we view each other who have differences from us. Okay, so since we're talking about it, do you two know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Conservative.
Well, in this case, yeah. So for anyone online or potential recording, we're doing this a number of hours after Charlie Kirk was shot in Utah, and he has been declared dead as well.
No, yeah, oh yeah.
Yes, yeah, he is. That's been confirmed. And so on the one side, we need across the aisles, right, the full spectrum. I think it would be good for our country to cool things down. We have gotten to a point as a nation where we can't disagree with each other without hating each other. And that's a bit of an extreme statement, but not as much as it should be, right? I think there's a place for disagreement, right? There's a place to say, well, I disagree with this person's views, and I disagree with that person's views. And that's all well and good. And quite frankly, society really can't function without that. That's how we grow and develop, and right, that's the American system, right? But once we get to the point, and this is not the first time we've gotten to this point as a country, right? I mean, in the past, year and a half, there have been a number of political assassinations and attempts on both sides of the aisle. And it is also worth saying that our country has also been here before historically. I mean, in the mid 1800s, we went to literal war with each other, with ourselves. So it's not as if, and I don't think that's coming. It's not as if we haven't been here before, and this is an irrevocable position. But I think we need to get to a place, and this is something we all have to do personally, of, who was it, Thomas Paine? I will disagree with everything you say, but I'll fight to my last breath to defend your right to say it, or something like that. And I think that's a virtue we need to get back as a country as a whole. I mean, I know there are plenty of people who have that mentality, but we need to get that back. Second of all, I think that we need to have, and again, I think we should have done this a long time. We need to have a serious conversation about the Second Amendment and guns and violence and mental health and everything else. I was considering, this is somewhat personal opinions here, but I think I'm reading some books, as I told Joe, from some of our professors. That's fine, you're allowed to.
I was kidding.
That's fine. I think what we need to, one thing that would be helpful for us to do, if any of you, I don't think any of you guys, you weren't even here. I did a book club in the first couple of years that I was here before COVID, and we read a book, Did the Resurrection Happen? But it was a really good book. It's a philosophical debate. Definitely worth reading, although it's not easy, because it's two philosophy professors going at it and in philosophy departments, so they don't coddle people. They're just full tilt going after things, and if you don't know what they're talking about, it can be hard to follow along with what they're saying. But one of the things that they talk there, actually the atheist philosopher gets kind of caught in his own trap, as it were. Anthony Flew has this concept called the falsifiability rationale, or whatever it is. And it's this sense of, if you hold a view and there's there's nothing that could happen that would get you to change your mind, or to change your view to recognizing that it's false, then it is an unreasonable view. And so Flew gets caught in this because he basically says there's no way he could ever be convinced that miracles happen. So he has no falsifiability clause there. And people kind of always get bent out of shape about this with Christianity, but Christianity has a falsifiability clause. It's baked into the epistles, right? If Christ is not raised from the dead, your faith is in vain. That's our falsifiability clause, right? Doesn't mean it has to happen, right? But if that is the bit of evidence that if presented with, we would say, okay, we're done. We're done here, pack it up. So in that sense, Flew would say that we have a reasonable faith, or our faith is capable of being reasonable. I think it's worth us sitting down and questioning, no matter where you land on the Second Amendment debate, what is the falsifiability clause? At what point, or is there a point that we say, enough is enough, this is too much, what is that cost? And I will say, I think I know what mine is. And to be fair, we can do this with all major political issues. It might be worthwhile to do. And yours doesn't have to be the same as anyone else, but it's a way for us to, I think, pause and take a moment and say, okay, how do we inform where we go from here? Because I think where we are is untenable. And you're welcome to disagree with me on that. But yeah, anyway. So I think that's kind of those are some of the takeaways for us as Christians here. I think we can recognize that it doesn't matter anyone's opinions or thoughts or how you feel about them, right? That political violence, or violence really of any kind, is sinful, wrong, and is a blight on the world, period, right? Like I said, I don't care what your opinions on Charlie Kirk or the Minnesota Congress people that were assassinated. Just get someone on each end of the spectrum here. I don't care what your opinions are there. Violence is an effect of the fall. It's evil, and it needs to be addressed. And quite frankly, and this comes up most of the time in my thinking when praying for our elected leaders, right? And I've had the joy of praying for two different elected leaders as a pastor on almost as far, definitely not as far as you can get apart from each other, but two very divisive individuals. And I think the best way for us to think about it is, if you don't like the person in charge in that case, or, who's debating for this case, or is the lawmaker, then you should be praying for them more, not less. And more than anything else, you should be praying for their protection and that God would care for them and look after them, right? And I think also, I'm on a soapbox. I promised myself no more than 15 minutes on this. So, not too long ago, this is another political thing, someone approached me to see if they could sell something here at Rivercliff. They called me because Pastor Jordan told them no last year, and so they called me this year, right? And it was a fundraising thing for Christians in Israel specifically, a certain portion community north of Jerusalem, and he wasn't taking no for an answer. And I mentioned Palestine and how, and I'm doing a little bit of work on this in my own time, kind of trying to wrestle with how we as Christians can deal with that issue, right? And we can talk more about that when I'm off camera and things like that. And his response was, well, you should really be thinking about the Christians. And I thought to myself, should I though? Because the Christians are fine, right? Now, I'm not saying that they're in a good state of living. They need help, don't get me wrong. And we should be helping those. The community he was trying to support needs money, right? And we should want to do that. But in my mind, is it not more true that we should be more willing to help and assist people who are not Christians, right? Dr. Kolb, he once was asked about the death penalty, and he said that he was in favor of the death penalty for Christians, but no one else. And that got a weird reaction. And the reason he said that, he said, I don't think any crime is punishable by hell because Jesus died for all of them. And I thought, well, that's not a great way to witness to people on death row. If you convert, then we'll execute you. But I think the point stands is that Christians and people of faith are fine no matter what happens in this world. So that's a long way. We're talking about what happened today. Yeah. That's a long way to say that it's the people that you disagree with that you should be praying for more than anything else. More than the people that you agree with. Because if you agree with them, then I should hope at least that you think God's got a good hold on them and they're doing what they're supposed to do. Now, you may go with the righteous Turk in the government and say, well, I don't really like this guy, but he's the best option, right? And I understand that that's a present reality. But anyway, that's a long way to say that. I said only 15 minutes, so I'm going to give you guys at least a couple of moments to react and see if we need to hit on anything else. Yeah.
I used to traffic this time of the day.
Right.
I get my decaf on the way. I was a little bit.
Well, we're glad to have you. If you guys want to talk more about this in a space that isn't being recorded, because I can understand hesitancy with that, I'm always happy to talk. And like I said, I'll do what I can to give you the the Christian position, because I have political views just like all of you guys do. I'm sure some of you know this, if not everyone. I don't know how well I hide it. I don't really go out of my way. I'm an extremely politically involved person. I don't like run campaigns, but I got my finger on the pulse of what's going on. It was something I did a lot in high school, and it stuck with me until I start feeling like I'm going to have stress-induced panic, and then I try and walk away from it for a little while. So I got my finger on the pulse of a lot of this stuff. But like I said, there's time and a place for it, and I think the reason I bring this up and give some time for it today, other than the fact that it's probably on most, if not all, of our minds, is I'm seeing a convergence where I don't get the option of not talking about it anymore. So.
I'm thinking that maybe we ought to be praying for ourselves that we're more tolerant of other people.
Oh, absolutely.
That doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but just to be tolerant of them.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. Praying for ourselves that we are more tolerant and open to these kinds of things. Right, and again, that doesn't mean you have to agree. I can guarantee you, right, I talk about this from time to time. Jesus' disciples, I'm sure there were some fiery conversations between Simon the Zealot, who, by the way, that group in a number of decades, it takes a little while after the time of Simon, they started stabbing people in the street who were exactly like Matthew, the tax collector, right? The people who went over to the other side. So I can guarantee you, Matthew and Simon, at least for a while, did not get along, or at least did not agree with each other, because they were, as far apart as our political spectrums could be, they were on opposite sides. Like I said, they were getting ready in the next few decades to start a civil war, and that's the Bar Kokhba Rebellion, which you can get a small sliver of a reference to in our upcoming series on the Epistle of Barnabas, right? See how I slid that in there? But no, I think you're absolutely right, Bill. Praying for ourselves that we can not necessarily accept what people are saying, but that we can look at those people like Jesus did. And remember, the people that Jesus spent the most time with were the people that he shouldn't have been spending time with, by all accounts, right? Are the people who were against him. At least, well, in one sense, against him as in living lives of rank and outright sin. And we're going to see it today as Jesus begins to interact with the Pharisees. Jesus interacts with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes a lot. For people who, as early as John chapter 5, decide that they're going to kill him, Jesus talks to them a lot and is engaging with them and is trying to love, or not trying, he is loving them and trying to bring them back, right? And our upcoming text for Sunday is the 3 famous lost parables of Luke. We're only getting the first 2. And I'm of the opinion that the first 2, the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin, were intended for all the tax collectors and prostitutes out there. Right? I love you. Come on. I'm gonna. You've wandered. I'm gonna get you back. You've been lost. I'm gonna find you. The third parable, though, I think was intended for the Pharisees and the Sadducees. That's the prodigal son. I don't think we should call it that. I think we should call that the parable of the second brother who got really ticked off that God was graceful, right? That's a parable meant to bring the Pharisees and the very people who are going to be killing Jesus into his fold. So, yeah, I mean, that's what Jesus does, and it can be hard. That's what the early church does too, right? You guys are all obsessed with that. They go and witness to the people that are killing them. So
it's hard to pray for people that you disagree with, and even people that you don't like, that you think are dead wrong.
Yeah.
But you know what? I used to be heavy into politics. It got to the point where it absorbed me, and I was
right.
I wasn't happy. But you know what? I have my beliefs, very conservative. I'll listen to anybody. I don't judge anybody. If you ask my opinion, I'll give it. I won't force you to do anything. I believe the government is on God's shoulder. And
we know that for sure, whether it looks good or not.
People that make decisions on everything from getting drunk to doing drugs to getting an abortion, that's it's sad and it's tragic, but that's between them and God. And I can tell them of salvation, but it's none of my business to judge and say, oh, I don't, that's like the Pharisee.
Right, your business is to witness, right? I mean, and you can do that by pointing out sin, right? The Bible does call us to point out sin, right? But to do so with the goal of bringing people to Christ. And I think as we pray for people that we disagree with, we'll find more and more that God softens our hearts towards them, right?
Absolutely.
Back to the thing you brought up about the meaning of the miracle. I've sometimes wondered, did the disciples, they could see a miracle and they would say, what was that all about?
Oh, I'm sure, right? And I think, we get this, I forget which gospel it is, but we get this sense, probably Luke, where a lot of the times the disciples are like, we didn't understand this till after his resurrection. And then like, oh, right? In Mark, Jesus does miracles in Mark, not and this is something I bring up a lot, right? There's only one human that figures out who Jesus is in the Gospel of Mark. There's only one human. Do you know who it is?
Oh, what's his name? I could tell you. The guy under the sycamore tree.
No, he's not in Mark.
What?
The only person in the Gospel of Mark specifically that confesses who Jesus is. Now, there's plenty of confessions, but they're all from like demons and stuff, right? And God the Father confesses as well. Is the centurion at the cross, right? Surely this man was he's the only one who figures it out, right? Meanwhile, in John, right, and again, the authors are emphasizing different things. In John, the wedding at Cana, they go, oh, this guy's God, right? Like they get it real quick. Now, they learned this lesson over and over again, right? But I think also, as with anything, right? I bet if you asked the disciples after, let's just say the wedding at Cana, just because we got that quote there, you know, the disciples believed. I bet if you asked them right after, they'd be like, oh yeah, I totally get it. Absolutely. And then you ask them, you know, on Holy Saturday, like, what was up with that wedding at Cana thing? They're going to be like, I have no idea. And then you ask them, you know, on the Monday after Easter, then they go, oh, okay, I totally get it now. And then you ask them 20 years later, for those that lasted that long, and they go, yeah, I understand that a lot more now. I really didn't know it was going. You know, I think just like I mean, how many times have you read some of these stories, right? And what do we say? Every time you come back, there's something else for you. I think that's very much the case here. Also, thank you, Bill, getting us back on track. I appreciate that. So, all right, so let's head into John chapter 5. This miracle is immediately following the previous miracle. So the healing at the pool at Bethesda on the Sabbath of the paralytic. There's all sorts of different things you can call this miracle. I typically call it the healing at Bethesda because I can't spell paralytic. So that's why I don't call it that very often. So we're looking at the healing of this man at the Pool of Bethesda. This is immediately following the healing of the official's son. But we're going to notice that there's some significant differences in kind of what's going on, and the mood has almost shifted a little bit. So let's see. Can I have a volunteer? We're going to read the miracle itself, and then we'll read the aftermath and kind of cover it that way. Can we have a volunteer to read chapter 5, verses, this is going to be tricky, 1 through 9a. So where the paragraph ends. Thanks, sir.
Okay. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Do I keep going?
No, please conclude there. You know, so this is me not using the same Bible to teach as I did to prep. So there's a textual issue we should deal with here. How many of your Bibles have an extra chunk in them?
Extra what?
An extra chunk that he skipped about an angel.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because the commentaries I read didn't deal with this. There's a footnote if you're using the Bibles from here at church. There is, it's right after 5, or the footnote is note 7. Anyway, that kind of explains this. There's someone else who gets in the pool before me, right?
The footnote says from time to time an angel of the Lord would come down
Right.
and stir up the waters.
Yeah, so there's and then whoever went in when the waters were stirred or troubled or stroked or whatever it is would be healed of any ailment that they had. And then the man says, Jesus says, do you want to be healed? He says, I do, but I can't get in the water in time, right? Since I didn't prep for that at all, Joe, do you have any? He's frantically on his tablet over there trying to help me out. Do you have any insight into this textual deviation?
I'm going to my text that had that kind of information tied in with it.
Well, tell you what, let's do this. I will let you keep working on that, and I will say that I'm not disappointed that it's not in all of our manuscripts because I don't really know what to make out of it. It's a weird thing, and none of the commentaries I read really dealt with it at all. This is probably why, even though the Concordia commentary translated it, they didn't talk about it anyway. Some of the church fathers have some ideas about what's going on here, but they're all symbolic in
Maybe
nature.
because they never found anyone who dipped into the pool after the water was stirred and was healed. So maybe that's why.
Well, so like I said, so he's looking up the history. This is definitely an issue of some copies of John have that and some don't. The way that most of the church fathers take this, the one, again, I'm reading not excerpts, but I'm reading St. Cyril's commentary here rather than just quotes from random fathers from a different commentary that I do have a quote from for today. Cyril takes this whole opening section to be extremely symbolic in nature, saying that the 5 pillars should make us think of the 5 books of Moses, and there's probably some value to that, and that the angel would come down one time a year because God came and brought the law to Israel once, and only one person could be healed in the waters because in the old covenant, so before Jesus in the new covenant, God's salvation was only for one people. And then we get a lot of baptismal language, which we will talk about the baptismal connections from this text because the commenters have made a connection between this text and baptism for about 1,600 years, so it's worth talking about, right? And I guess that's as good of interpretation as any. You got something for me, Joe?
The specifics won't mean anything to you if I start listing manuscripts, but simply the text as you have it in your Bible is supported by 2 of the oldest papyri,
Okay.
which means they're very old, and also by Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, the 2 most respected manuscripts, 2 of the Bibles of the 50 that Constantine commissioned to be sent among these churches. These 2 manuscripts seem to be one of the part of that batch of
Tradition.
Yeah.
So for what it's worth, we'll do very briefly here. This is a field called text criticism, which is different than the one we don't like, higher criticism. Text criticism is the process and the science. It really is a science too. Now there's some art to it as well, but it is a science of looking at various manuscript traditions and figuring out what the original most likely said. It's a field of study that exists outside of biblical scholarship as well. Probably the second most text critically analyzed book. Anyone have a guess?
Revelation?
No. Outside of the Bible.
Oh, outside.
Yeah, outside of the Bible. It's in classical literature, and you all have heard of it. You've even watched Brad Pitt play the main character. Is the Iliad. The Iliad has a large text critical tradition as well, where scholars look through in ways that are extreme. I have gone through like kindergarten level primers is what it felt like when I was at seminary of how these guys do these things, because it's really hard. And just so I can have some understanding of how we got the text that we have today. And a lot of work goes into it. And biblical text criticism is in some ways extremely difficult because we have so much evidence, which in many ways helps.
We have maybe 10 copies?
Yeah, of the old copies,
yeah.
right, yeah. Whereas the Bible, you got like 10,000. And it's real fun, you know, this is, just to kind of give you a sense of the breadth of how complicated this is. So when when Joe Schmo archaeologist is digging around and he finds a piece of papyrus, right? Papyrus is paper made from the papyrus plant, really common in Egypt, right? And it has some Greek letters on it. It's only this big. It's not a big piece. The rest of it got destroyed. And it's written on the front and on the back, and he goes, wonder what that is. Sends it off to a museum. People in the museum, text critics, then look at it and say, all right, I'm going to figure out what this is. Imagine how difficult this is, right? Now, just take ancient literature, right? Forget all the books we have now, right? I'll even do this. Let's just pretend we know it's from the Bible, which is not always a guarantee. I take a cutout here, and I make it kind of sloppy. And I say, figure out where it says, spoke, blank, 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 swarms of flies and gnats, blank, 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 hail for rain and fiery lightning, blank, 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 blank. He struck down, and that's all you have. And you don't even know if it's from the Iliad, if it's from the Bible, if it's someone's shopping list. They wouldn't have written that down on papyrus, right? Or just some mundane document. And you have someone who knows what they're doing. And they go, oh, that's Psalm 105. And then they put it together with all the other evidence that they have. And then on the other side, it's like Psalm 43, right? Because of the work that these guys do is incredible. That is what is a part of what's going into this. The big codices that he's talking about, specifically Sinaiticus, that one's not as hard because it's a whole Bible. So there's no real question, well, I wonder what this is, right? It's the Bible, right? That's not hard. But a lot of these fragmentary bits are really hard to figure out, but they can do it. It's
one of them, P66.
That means papyrus number 66, by the way.
Has a large portion of John in it.
I was just saying, that's a significant one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about that. It's not just a fragment, it's whole pages, and it's about that thick, and it's primarily John with parts or pages missing because it's a very old, brittle manuscript. But the other thing is the inclusion of that information, those verses that are left out most of our modern text. Primarily, they're in there in very late manuscripts of the sort of the King James flavor, the same kind of the majority text that the King James was translated from, and the indication is that there would in a lot of those there was an attempt to expand things to explain things people may not understand.
Yeah, so decoding some of that, even though I think what he said is very easy to understand, right? Two rules that predominate most of text criticism. One is older manuscripts carry more weight, right? That makes sense. The older it is, the more likely it is to not have anything wrong in it. The second one, which is really frustrating, is the more difficult reading is likely the correct one, because you're not going to make a clear text less clear, but it's more likely that someone will take an unclear text and make it clear. So I think the implication here, just based on the evidence that we have, look, we're all little text critics now, it's great. The implication here is you have this section where it references, sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm going, another one steps down before me. And maybe some scribe who knew some legends about the Pool of Bethesda thought, no one's going to know what John's talking about here, right? I know because I'm from this area and I'm from the time, I'm going to just add in an explanation, right? A little parenthetical statement. This is what the legend was. This is what in the world John's talking about. Which is all well and good, except then it's not the Bible, if that is what happened. And so with these sorts of editorial notes, sometimes, especially when they don't appear in other places, the two of our text critical rules of older predominates generally and less clear predominates generally are probably why your Bibles look the way they do right now.
You're going to get to this when you make the connection to baptism.
Yes.
But the sick they really felt the water was the thing that was curing them, right?
If we are assuming that the text there is original, which I think is worth doing here, they weren't assuming it was, right? So at least the parenthetical that's removed, it is not ambiguous. The angel of the Lord is what it says, comes down, stirs the water, and the first person that went in was healed. Period. And again, if we're assuming that this is breathed out by God, that means that's what was happening. Furthermore, the man says that he's been an invalid for 38 years. We don't know exactly what that means, right? It could mean that he was born an invalid and then he's 38 years old. It could mean that he has been at this pool, and this is how some of the church fathers take it. He's been at this pool for 38 years. He's had 38 attempts to get in the pool, and he hasn't been able to make it in first. Which would also imply that he has seen it working, because otherwise he wouldn't stick around, right?
Yeah.
I think no matter what, we are witnessing a man who has been here a number of years. Because no matter what he says, right? I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, or while I am going. It means he's done this before, and it hasn't worked for him, right? Not because he goes in first and then he's not healed, but because someone cuts him in line is the sense, right? And so I think it's worth, no matter how weird it is, I think it's worth saying that for whatever reason, God was healing people through these waters.
But literally just one a year?
It's a weird, it's weird. And like I said, the best explanation I got was that symbolic one, right? That just as, God only gave his covenant to Israel in the new covenant, now he gives it to everyone. And that's and he said, just as the angel of the Lord stirred up the water just once a year, now it stirs the waters of baptism, not only in one place and for one person, but for all people across the world, right? This is how the church fathers are interacting with this text. And it seems, granted, I only went through 3 commentaries, and the Concordia commentary guy, he is very much a symbolic interpretation guy. He gives almost, at least in the miracle accounts that I've done so far, he gives basically no literal interpretation stuff. Like first level interpretation, he jumps to spiritual a lot. It might sound like that's a critique, and it is. I wish he would do more of the front end stuff. I'm fine with the spiritual. Joe and I have talked about this a number of times. Using a spiritual interpretation of the text, for the most part, is fair, right? To say, with good reason, right, that the 5 colonnades are meant to invoke in us the image of the 5 books of Moses, and Cyril is convinced that this is the festival of Pentecost, even though we're not told that, but that's the next festival if you go with the previous one in there. And so he draws connections to Sinai there and that sort of thing. Making those spiritual connections is fine. It can be a little dangerous because sometimes you can go weird directions with stuff. A great example, I don't know who thought this up, but one person I know, it's used as a bad example in the seminary, is that when Ahab, right, bad king, gets shot by arrows and the dogs lick his wounds as Elijah prophesied, they say, this is a type of communion. I don't think this is prefiguring Jesus and the Lord's Supper, right? I see how you got there,
Right.
but I don't think that's it, right? So we need to be careful with spiritualizing the text. And I think critically, that should not be our first understanding, right? We should say, well, let's get a deeper understanding here and see what else we can connect throughout the Bible. I think that can be fair. But we need to, right, this is a hermeneutical principle. Man, you guys are getting like, I should start charging you. This is like the first year of seminary.
I love this.
Yeah, well, go to seminary. This is what we do. But your first interpretation should be, one of your first questions should be, how did the people the first audience, how did they understand this? And you can even go one level deeper in stuff like narrative, is how did the people present in the story understand this, right? No one was sitting at this pool at Bethesda thinking, oh yes, the 5 colonnades of the books of Moses. And yes, God can do bigger things without people realizing it, but we need to recognize that that's not why this man is here. He's not like, oh, 5 pillars, Pentecost, stirring of the waters. Yes, this is no. He's there because, why? Why is this man here?
He's an invalid. He wants to be healed.
There you go. It's more than just, to be an invalid, you can be anywhere, right? Yeah. He wants to be healed, right? That's kind of key to why he's here rather than somewhere else. And so that's our first line. So what does that tell us, right? And then if you want to do more spiritual interpretation later, okay, we can tread carefully into those waters. But you should, with very few exceptions, spiritualize the text first. And the exceptions to that are like the Psalms, which are poems. So they're meant to be understood in a symbolic, or in this case, spiritual nature. Revelation kind of, and portions of Daniel kind of fit in here as well, because they're meant, that is the genre that they are in. So you're better off doing that there. But it should really not be the first thing that you do.
It seems kind of strange that Jesus would say, do you want to be healed?
All right, let's get to that. Why is it strange, Bill? Why is it strange?
He's been there 38 years.
Okay, well, yes. Duh. That's not quite where I was going to go with this, right? Because me, as a Lutheran in the 21st century, I hear Jesus come up to someone and say, do you want to be healed? And what do I hear? Alarms are going off like crazy. It's like, get out of here, Arminius. This isn't a free will desiring your own salvation. Like, I can't do what this means, right? Jesus is not knocking on the door of this man's heart to see if he'll let him in, right? Yeah. And that's kind of what it sounds like at first. But I think Cyril does a fantastic job. And I can give you the full quote later if you want. The way Cyril deals with this, he understands this as prefiguring baptism, which I think is reasonable, right? And so Cyril notes, Jesus does not wait for the man to ask for healing, right? Now, we might say, well, hold on. He just asked the man if he wanted to be healed. He says, this is a quote, he runs, you see, to the one who is lying down. He has compassion on the one who is sick and helpless, right? Later he goes on, and I'm summarizing his point here. He notes that Jesus' question here is not intended to ask if, but rather to spur the man to look to Jesus as his only source of healing, right? Jesus doesn't put him in the water, does he? No. Jesus doesn't say, I'll stir the water, or I'll pray. And Cyril makes a big point of this, that Jesus doesn't pray, and we'll talk about that as well. Oh, yeah. Cyril notes, right, in a more non-Arminian, right, so we can turn the alarm bells off. Like, okay, no, we're okay here. Jesus does not stand waiting for the man to come to him. Jesus goes and seeks out the one who needs healing. And yes, he asks the question, but that question is not meant as a, can I come into your heart and you believe in me? It's a, you need to believe in me. I'm going to give you life. Right? Just like God does to us in baptism. Right? And so this is where they start. By the way, it's shocking. The church fathers really Lutheran in their understanding of baptism. It's wild, right? We talk about this in the Didache. Actually, I think that episode has come out where, like, right, did you know that even in the early church, it was okay to not do immersion baptism? Because we have firsthand accounts of that, right? But Cyril kind of sees this pointing of that it's not Jesus waiting for the man to come to him. Jesus is seeking this man out. So we have God bringing people to him, not the other way around. Someone looked like they had something. Joe, that day.
Jesus asking that question seems sort of off the wall until you find out more about this man later on. And one of the things you find out about him is that there's something that was wrong in his life, because Jesus says, sin no more.
Sin no more, right.
He talks to him the next time. And the other thing is, unlike the next really big miracle, the man born blind, this guy goes and tells the Pharisee, it's Jesus. That guy did it.
So it's interesting because there's some controversy here, right?
Yeah.
What is he doing? Let's tell you what, I'll just read the rest of what we're going to read today.
Yeah.
That way we can get the whole picture, because we're not following my bullet points anyway, right? Yeah, I'm not tied to it. Now, watch this. This is where we're getting a pretty big thing. Now that day was the Sabbath. By the way, not only the Sabbath, but a Sabbath during a festival. So an even more important Sabbath than they normally are, which they're a big deal. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." All right. So we see conflict over the Sabbath. This, by the way, we're spurring the Jewish people already want to kill Jesus for this event, right? It's interesting to note, let's talk some Sabbath stuff here. So a little bit of background for cultural understanding of the Sabbath of the day. Sabbath was crucial for the Jews. It gave them identity, connected them with salvation, and was seen as sanctified by God, right? The identity part comes mostly because of stuff that happened in the intertestamental period. Circumcision holds this same weight. This is how the Jews kept their identity as the Seleucids and, to a lesser extent, the Ptolemies were persecuting them and trying to remove their identity through the process of Hellenization, which wasn't like an anti-Semitic program. They did it to everyone. It's just that the Jews resisted it, and most other groups didn't. Now, some anti-Semitic stuff happens, particularly under Antiochus IV. He goes full-blown anti-Semitism, ethnic cleansing, and resting on the Sabbath and circumcision are a major part of that. And so because of that recent history, the Jews of Jesus' day see those two things. How do you know that someone is a Jew? Well, they're circumcised, which isn't something you can check very easily necessarily, and they rest on the Sabbath, right? That is what makes them who they are, right? Above this, it connects them with salvation, right? God gave them the Sabbath on Mount Sinai. He gave them the Sabbath as he rescued them from Israel. So the Sabbath connects them to their salvation. And the Sabbath was seen as sanctified by God. Why is that?
Well, God created the earth.
God rested on the Sabbath, and he made it holy by doing so, right? And so the Sabbath was a big deal. How is that? I had more notes on this. Where did they go? All right. Another thing that's worth noting, a lot of times when Jesus is interacting with Pharisees about the Sabbath, he's dealing with quote-unquote man-made laws, which is true, right? The traditions of the Jews at this point was to put a hedge around the Sabbath, just like they did with around the misuse of the name of God, right? By the way, if you're ever in conversation with a Jewish person, don't use the phrase Yahweh. We understand the proper use, but it's insulting is not the right word.
It's a four-letter word.
Well, it's not a four-letter. I mean, it is, but it's not. It's a holy name, and so it's blasphemous. Yahweh, the divine name, right? They would view it as blasphemous. It's just going to shut down conversation, right? In Jesus' day, they replaced it with the word Adonai. This is why people around KJV time think Yahweh is pronounced Jehovah. I've had that conversation before. I can have it again, not on recording if you want. We can do that again later. It was changed shortly after because Adonai was too closely related with Yahweh that the Jewish people during the rabbinic and Talmudic period said, no, we should use the name Hashem, which just means the name. Sometimes you'll hear that today, but even now it's starting to be replaced in a lot of Jewish circles with Adoshem, because Hashem is too related to. So they mush Adonai and Hashem
Keep kicking the
together.
can down the road.
Yeah, and the idea is to keep that, right?
Keep it safe.
The sense was, right, if God says don't touch the podium, well, what's a good way to keep people from not touching the podium? Well, you don't want to just tell them not to do it, right? You put a big barbed wire fence with electricity and alarms further away so that people can't even get to the place. And so that's why the Jewish people don't use the divine name. In the same sense they did it with the Sabbath. They added extra laws about what you can and cannot do on the Sabbath to make sure that no one was breaking the Sabbath. By Jesus' day, they are taking those as God-given laws. And so oftentimes when Jesus is dealing with the Sabbath and the Pharisees getting mad at him about the Sabbath, they are mad at him because he is breaking their man-made laws. And Jesus takes them to task hard about that. That is not the case here. To take up a burden and travel is forbidden in the Levitical law for the Sabbath. So what this man is doing is breaking the Old Testament commandments about Sabbath. He is.
Just to pick up a mat?
To take a burden and to travel. Mat is probably an anachronism, right? It's not a yoga mat. He has a pallet that he is walking around with. That's probably closer.
It's okay to carry your clothes, but carrying something external to you.
Right, is,
the issue.
and that's, right, like I said, that's not extra rules. There are plenty of those. That is in the Mosaic law, right? And so this is interesting, right? Because why is this man, no matter how you mark it, why is this man breaking the Sabbath?
Jesus told him to.
Because Jesus told him to,
Yeah.
right? Now that's kind of strange. Why? So, well,
That's probably why they were saying, oh, he's got a demon, you know.
well, that's other stuff. But yeah, I mean, this kind of thing is upsetting them. There's something kind of crazy here. Is the man, well, we'll get to that in a second. The one who heals on the Sabbath, the first thing he does is command the one he heals to break it. Why? Why do you think Jesus does that?
He has the authority.
So one, he has the authority, right? So I established the Sabbath. I get to do with it what I want, right? So good. That's part of it. And Jesus will bring that up later in, I don't know if it's in John specifically, but he talks about that, right? The Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Those kinds of things, right? He is the Lord of the Sabbath, right? He's the one who spoke the Sabbath into existence in the first place, and he spoke to heal this man. So he can do what he wants. So good. That's part of it. Why else? So one idea that gets brought up a lot in the early church is that the reason Jesus does this, because everyone kind of picks up on this in the commentaries, is that Jesus does this to show how redemption will take place, not by obedience, but by faith. This man is hearing Jesus' words, and he's trusting, he's believing in them, right? What's his reaction when the Jews accuse him of breaking the Sabbath? Well, the guy who healed me told me to.
Exactly.
Why would I not listen to him? Right? That's the sense. So what is this man kind of, at least implicitly, what does he understand?
Jesus had the authority to tell him to.
Right. Someone who has the authority to heal on the Sabbath has authority over the Sabbath as well. So it doesn't explicitly say it, but I think we can conclude here that this man believes Jesus is God, right? Just like the officials' household believed, just like the disciples and the servants believed. He sees this miracle happen, this time to himself, and he recognizes who it is to some extent. He recognizes who it is who has healed him.
The miracle worker told me to do that.
Right. Well, okay. So this is a good place to transition into this. Why does Jesus heal in this sense without praying? How does Jesus heal? Let's do it this way rather than through the negative.
By speaking the word.
He speaks the healing out. What does that remind you of?
The word became
Creation.
Okay, so the word became flesh, good, and then creation, right? This is not this is the modus operandi, right? He speaks and it is done, right? Is this how the prophets do miracles? No. And so what, I don't even remember which commentary it is. They make the point that Jesus does not use the pool to heal. He does not pray about the healing. He doesn't appeal to someone outside of himself. On his own authority, as Son of God, he speaks the healing into existence. And so we're seeing that question. I wrote it down in a clever way here. Somewhere. Okay, so Cyril notes Jesus doesn't pray for the man to distinguish himself from the prophet, simply speaks and is done, just like the God of creation. See, this is what happens when I go completely out of order with what I have written down. Anyway, the question here that the Jews are forced to deal with is, who is Jesus? Is he man or is he God? And I don't mean this in a two natures sort of way, right? Is this someone who is to be subject to the Mosaic covenant, or is this the one who established and therefore can fulfill the Mosaic covenant? The man realizes, like I said, implicitly or explicitly, we don't know. He realizes that Jesus is the Word made flesh. The Jews do not. They recognize him as a blasphemer. The word blasphemy was in it. I'm going to find it at some point. Here we go. Is this the work of a man blaspheming the Sabbath, or is this the words of the creator of the Sabbath, right? And how you answer that question determines how you react to this, right? The man who's healed reacts to this as, well, this is the creator of the Sabbath, right? He could not have, I don't think he could have explained that. He doesn't answer that way, right? But that's his faith, right? Whether he can verbalize it or not. The Jews who see this and begin to plot against him, it is a man who is blaspheming the Sabbath. And they're recognizing that this is a man who needs to die. Already. This is already going on. Accusations and plots against Jesus are beginning as early as chapter 5. They're going to continue. And what's the final nail in the coffin? You guys know that moves the Pharisees from, we probably need to get rid of this guy, probably kill him, to he needs to die now. Lazarus.
Yeah.
And man, poor Lazarus, because we always skip over this part. Who else do they want to kill? Lazarus. Like, we got to get rid of both of these guys. I have no biblical foundation for this, but when Pastor Jordan started telling me about his Lazarus Laughs sermon, I told him, good sermon, right? Well, I've now heard it. He was just telling me about it. I said, oh, that's a really clever idea, except for the thing that I'm pretty sure Lazarus died on Good Friday. That is my entirely extra biblical guess, because this was a giant conspiracy, right? They're moving on Jesus. I think they sent a hit squad for Lazarus. Do I have any proof of that, Mark?
No.
No, got nothing, right? There's no record one way or the other, but I don't think Lazarus lived past Good Friday, personally. But who knows, right? Maybe you can speak against it because Mary and Martha aren't really concerned about Lazarus and they are about Jesus, but who knows? Maybe raising Lazarus from the dead kind of squared them away about that. This is one of my crazy theories, right? I've never said it to a professor, so I don't know how crazy it is, but that seems fitting to me.
Yeah, it's good.
Good question so far while I try and find my place in things.
Well, the end result of all of this is Jesus gets 2 strikes against him. They now have 2 charges against him because he just called God his father.
Right. Well, yeah. So which is also going to be a problem, right? I love teaching these claims that Jesus makes, right, to confirmands and to younger students, because I ask them, say, were the Pharisees right in thinking? This most often comes up with when Jesus is having an argument with the Pharisees, and he concludes, well, before Abraham was ego eimi, which is Yahweh, but in Greek. He uses the divine name. It's not just before Abraham was I am, and you go, oh, that's the same vocable as that is a loaded phrase. If you translate it, Jesus says, before Abraham was Yahweh, right? I'm God. And what's the reaction to that? I can't remember. This is the one where they're trying to stone him, right? Throwing him off a cliff is, oh yeah, God cares about Gentiles too. And they're like, throw him off a cliff, right? Yeah, I've noticed, everyone gets that wrong. When Jesus opens up the Isaiah scroll and talks about, God coming in his hometown. And I preached on this not too long ago, and he says, this is fulfilled in your hearing. And most people who talk about this text say, well, that's why they wanted to throw him off a cliff, because he said he's God. No. He says he's God. He says, I am the Messiah, right? And do you know what the reaction of his hometown is?
He can't be the Messiah. He knows his brothers. And his
No, that's a different.
Oh, that's a different
That happens, but it's a different thing. They say, the hometown kid, he is the Messiah. All right, I'm from the Messiah's hometown. They're pumped up about it. And then Jesus goes on and he says, were there not many widows starving in the days of Elijah, and yet only the widow of Zarephath, a non-Jew, was saved? And were there not many lepers in the day of Elisha, but only Naaman, an Assyrian, is healed? And they go, hold on, Jesus, off the cliff. That ain't gonna fly here, right? It's because he starts talking about salvation for Gentiles too. And he also says, and I'm going to be rejected by my hometown. So, yeah, that's why they want to kill him then. The other one where they try and stone him is because he says, I'm God, unequivocally, right? And so I love asking my confirmands, were they right? Were the people who wanted to stone Jesus right? And it's a loaded confirmation question, which means that no matter what they say, they're wrong. If Jesus isn't who he is, that was the punishment for blasphemy. Claiming that you are God when you are not meant you died. That's the way it was. That's the way the covenant goes, right? The only reason it's wrong is because Jesus is actually who he said he is, right? But if Joe Schmo said, oh, before Abraham was, I am, get stones. Let's get them. That's it. Nope, you're done. You're out, right? But because Jesus, that is who he is, then it's not blasphemy, right? But by all earthly accounts, what Jesus said was a blasphemous statement if literally anyone else ever said it. And meant it, right? I said it a lot, but I'm quoting Jesus, right? But yeah, and so we're seeing that conflict already going, right? And he starts talking about God as his father, and this isn't, what was it? Oh. This last Sunday, and Pastor Jordan didn't deal with it at all, which is totally fine, by the way. It's a different way to go with the text. Jesus, in our reading last Sunday, said, take up your cross and follow me, right? And we as Christians go, okay, right? We're to follow Jesus in the way of suffering. What did we say our first rule of hermeneutics was? Hermeneutics is biblical interpretation. What's the first thing that we should do? Because that's spiritualizing the text. A little bit. That's already spiritualizing it. What did the people standing with Jesus when he said that, what did they hear? Because where does Jesus say this?
We live this side of a sanitized cross.
Well, that's part of it, yeah.
They lived in a time where the cross literally meant this is the way you execute terrible criminals.
Right, the worst of the worst, and it's about the worst way to die. I think humans have figured out some worse ways, right? I mean, there's very few things I would put below the cross on my list of preferences, but they exist. But not only did they live the other side of the sanitized cross, what else did they live the other side of? When in his ministry does Jesus say to his disciples, pick up your cross and follow me? You guys know this, you're just not making the connection. What don't they have the context of that we have?
The resurrection.
Not only the resurrection,
or the crucifixion.
they don't know Jesus is going to be crucified.
Right. Yeah.
So when Jesus says this to them, they don't go, oh, I should follow after my Savior in sacrificing myself the way he does, right? Like we can kind of, which is not a wrong thing to do, right? Don't get me wrong. But I think we really need to understand the just like jaw-dropping wrecking ball impact of what Jesus says. And Pastor Jordan did hit on this sort of thing in his sermon, right? So thematically, he's still in line there. Don't mishear that. But again, we all rattled through, take up your cross and follow me. One, ours is sanitized, right? Two, the only context the disciples had is that's what happens to terrorists, right? It's removing all of the torture and public shame aspect, but it would be akin to if Jesus said, anyone who wants to follow me should go dig themselves into an ISIS bunker and wait for a Patriot missile. Right? Because that's what you do to terrorists. That's the Romans crucified terrorists. That's how they didn't have patriots, so they used the cross, right? And it's far worse than that because there's also the torture and the, if you're in the bunker when the Patriot missile happens, I don't think you're even aware that you are no longer in existence, right? You do when you're being crucified. So again, the impact of the way the first hearers would have heard this kind of stuff is bigger than we who are not only familiar with it, but also have the context of what is to come slamming into it. How did I get here? Someone help me. There was something about this that was shocking, but we have the future. I don't know. Bill, you're usually good at figuring out how I got onto my rabbit holes. Anyway,
well, the two things they're going to charge you with is you break the Sabbath and you make yourself equal to God.
Right, and yeah.
So they're going to kill you.
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. Like I said, I don't know how I got onto last week's gospel, but when Jesus says God is his Father, I got there, right? he's not meaning that in kind of the modern's a very loose term here, in the sense that we often do, right, where we, say we can pray our Father, right? We view God as our Father, right? This, to the hearers, is
Literal.
my God or my dad is God, right? That's a bit of a crass way to put it, but that is what these people are hearing. Not, we have one God who is the Father of us all, which is true, but they are hearing this as Jesus saying, I am the Son of God, right? And all of that impact, right? And we should expect all of this from John chapter 1 with the Logos, and this is what John's point is.
John does just an artistic thing with the use of Father. Throughout the whole gospel, it's either the Father or my Father until you get to chapter 20.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says to Mary Magdalene, I've not yet ascended to my Father and your Father.
Right.
First time is after his death and resurrection, he then assigns our relationship to the Father.
Yeah. Right, once that relationship has been mended.
Which we could have never had if he didn't die.
Exactly, right. So, one more thing that we definitely want to get into because...
Excuse me.
Since we're still on the Sabbath, I do have a note on this, right? This text is dripping with irony, right? The one who created the Sabbath commands someone to break the Sabbath, right? The ones who are defending the Sabbath miss the arrival of the new and the true Sabbath, right? And so we got irony kind of going all about here, right? And that leads us to, right, is this the work of a man blaspheming the Sabbath or the one who creates the Sabbath, right? Now, Jesus says two lines to this man, or three, right? But the only thing Jesus says to this man after he is healed is, see you are well, sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. That's all he says. So, Jesus is wrapping more into this healing, right? I think when we see this healing here, we should see it as more than a physical healing, which has been happening this whole time, right? This is a healing of body and soul. Many of Jesus' miracles, maybe all of them, are connected to the forgiveness of sins, right? Jesus is forgiving sins in his miracles, right? We see that when Jesus tells this man to rise, get up, rise, take your bed and walk. Who is another person, Jesus says, rise and come out? Lazarus, right? So we're seeing John is using, I think it's the same turn of phrase, that arise. John is seeing these as similar, if not identical events, right? This man is being saved not only from his physical malady, just like Lazarus was, right? Being dead, I suppose, is a physical malady. It's a pretty serious one, right? But also the spiritual malady, right? Jesus is making this man whole, right? He's not just healing him. And so then Jesus, after making this man whole, after bringing him to faith, he exhorts him to a righteous life. Sin no more, right? Now, the question is, and Joe at least insinuated one of the possible interpretations, what is Jesus referring to when he says, rise and sin no more? Or, put a different way, how are we to take the next verse? The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him, right? Because he didn't know earlier, now he knows. So how do we take what this man does here, going to tell the Jews? What was his motivation?
I think he was happy and he was telling the truth. And he wanted to spread the word. Look, this is Jesus. He really did. He really is who he says he is. Look at me.
Okay, that's one interpretation. Joe, what's the other one?
The other is he's throwing Jesus under the bus.
Right.
So that
It's a deep betrayal, and Jesus even warns him about it. right?
Don't talk to me about the Sabbath. Get him.
Go to him, right?
He broke it.
My opinion, and Cyril agrees with me on this one, so I got a big name to back me up here, is that that's not what this man is doing. You see a man, again, Cyril has some great quotes, but I didn't write them all down, where he says, well, Jesus healed me, you want healing too. Let me take you to the man who made me whole so that you can be made whole too, right? It's almost like, you remember the Magi?
Yeah.
Tell me where he is so that I can worship him too. And the Magi have every intention. Oh, you want to worship Jesus too? Awesome. We'll go find you and bring you to him. The angel's like, don't do that. That's not why they want anyone to know, right? I get the impression that this man is thrilled with his healing, is recognizing Jesus as his Savior, and is trying to be a witness.
I would go as far as to say he was born again from that moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, to use that phrase, right, which is
life than he used to.
Which is a Johannine phrase, right? That comes earlier. Absolutely. And so that's how I take it. How do you take it as the betrayal, or?
I think it's in confessing his faith.
Yeah, there are commentaries have gone both ways on this one. Usually the ones that see betrayal see this as kind of prefiguring Judas and that whole situation. But I think that's, I don't know, I think that's reading into this. To me, I get exactly that feeling that this man is overjoyed. And Cyril says, well, of course, because Jesus doesn't make a big show of his miracle, right? He heals the man and then he disappears. Right? The guy doesn't even really know who he is. He has to find him later in the temple, which, right, that's where Mary and Joseph found him. So, of course, right in his father's house. And Cyril goes as far to say as well, of course, Jesus left this man to be the witness. He's just doing what Jesus wanted him to do and spreading the word of the healing, right? Just like the official son would have, or the official and his son would have been doing in Galilee, just like in Cana, right? Jesus has already done this. Miracle, leave, you go spread the news, right? That's kind of the idea that Cyril takes with this. Let's see. Is there anything else that we need to cover here? Or did we... Any questions?
He might have been saying, hey, you missed the point. The main thrust of all this was, I was healed. Jesus healed me. And you're bringing up this thing about the Sabbath.
Right, and I think if you take it with the negative view, he's like, oh shoot, they're going to come after me. So I'm throwing Jesus up. Go get him. He's the one who told me to do it, right? If you take the positive spin, which I think also contextually fits a little bit better, he's not hiding him breaking the Sabbath, right? He's not like slinking around. He's just walking around.
Yeah.
And he confesses even immediately. He says, well, the man who healed me told me to do it. And he healed me. So of course I'm going to do it, right? And so I think you're absolutely right. You almost get the sense of he's trying to correct misunderstandings that people are having. Maybe he's naive about that, but a brilliant theologian once said that Christians are designed to interact with the world with a level of naivety. In case you didn't figure it out, it was Joe who said that. But this is like the fourth time I've used that quote, so it's a very quotable line. It's great. I think that's more of what's going on here. Also, as cynical as I am deep down in my soul, I like to try and take positive spins on things, right? Take the wins where you can, man. And John doesn't seem to be mad at this guy, right? Here's another crazy Pastor Berlinski theory.
What's the second miracle? What's that?
This is the third.
This is the third,
Yeah.
okay. Well,
So this is another one of these crazy Pastor Berlinski theories. I can't remember if we talked about it here or somewhere else, so I didn't talk about this recently. I think John was a young kid when he wrote this. Was that here that we talked about? And I think John held some grudges, and he doesn't seem to hold a grudge against this guy. So I think that might be some third level hermeneutical evidence, if you will, to support, but supporting evidence too. John doesn't seem mad, but and then that scoundrel went and betrayed. Okay, he doesn't do that, right? I mean, he throws Judas under the bus every chance he gets, right? And he doesn't with this one. So, good. Any other questions? If not, I gotta.
You didn't cover the connection to baptism.
Oh, yes. So, thank you, Bill.
Bill, what did you just say? Didn't cover the connection to baptism.
Right. So the idea here is that people have seen the connection between the stirring of the waters and the living waters of baptism, Jesus renewing and healing and making someone whole, as prefiguring baptism. Let's see. Right, that Jesus goes to the man rather than waiting for the man to come to him.
Well, I thought the connection you were going to say was it's not the simple water only.
Well, absolutely. Well, and in this case, it's not the water at all, right? Well, absolutely, right. He heals with the word. Thank you, Bill. That's in here somewhere. Where it's in the man's confession, which is not. It's not
There was nothing
here.
mentioned about going to be baptized or anything after the healing.
Well, so baptism isn't given to the church until after the resurrection,
Oh,
right? And so you would be forgiven for not quite making that connection because Jesus is baptized, and that happens before. But and someone helped me think through this recently. So just sit down with this guy for like an hour every Wednesday, and it's amazing what you learn. Jesus is baptized with a different baptism than the rest of us. It's John's baptism. Now, are there connections? Yeah, you better believe it. But it is different. And the baptisms that were happening before the resurrection, because they were occurring, right? John was doing it. John even says, I baptize with water. There's one to come who will baptize with, it's the Spirit and fire, right? He'll baptize the earth, and maybe that's a reference to the end of the world, probably both and sort of a situation. But the baptism in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? And that is something Jesus gives as instructions to the disciples after the resurrection. Because we don't have indication, the disciples don't baptize during Jesus' ministry. They do. Okay.
But John quickly says, but Jesus didn't baptize anybody.
Okay. There we go. So they do, but Jesus doesn't, right? So yeah, I think we wouldn't expect to see the baptismal command here. And so we rather look to elements like, well, he's here healed with the word. I just had it. Now the man who healed did not know was, this one says, the man who healed me, that man said. So Cyril makes a point that it doesn't say healed, at least in his translation. I don't know what he's using. It says the man who made me well, giving that new creation connection that he makes. This man is now a new creation in the new Adam, in the new covenant, just like baptism. And then he's given that that command, go sin no more, right? You are now in Christ, so don't live like you used to live. Live this new life in Christ. Is that okay? There's a great quote by Augustine. He picks up on, this is just kind of an aside from everything else, it is why I'm backing up here. Augustine picks up on Jesus saying, get up, take your bed, and walk, right? That specific command. It's a little bit of an extended quote, but it's really good. So this is Augustine, right? The big Lutheran guy. What significance is there then in the bed, I ask you? What? Except that the sick man was carried on the bed. But when healed, he carries the bed. What was said by the apostle? Bear your burdens, each for the other, and so you will fulfill the law of Christ. Now, the law of Christ is love, and love is not fulfilled unless we bear our burdens, each for the other. Bearing with one another, he says, in love, eager to preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. When you were sick, your neighbor was carrying you. You have been healed. Carry your neighbor. So you will fulfill, oh man, what was lacking to you. So the idea here is that this is a call to living the sanctified life, right? When you were sick, others were carrying you. You're healed now. You are now alive in Christ. It's your turn to go carry some dead people, right? Which is a dramatic way of saying it's now your turn to go to those who are still dead in their sins and carry them. There's also the aspect, he goes on that missional thing. There's also the sense, which I think we need a little bit more of in the church, and Rivercliff is good about this, but this idea of you carry the people who need to be carried, right? I mean, I know that you all have been through, this is one of the amazing things about being a pastor. Sometimes I marvel, right? I'm standing up about to give the sermon, at the tail end of the hymn, and I look out at the people there, and I kind of just sit, and I'm sure, Joe, you had the same experience. I know Pastor Jordan is, because right as I was getting ready to write a newsletter article about it, he preached about it and stole the idea from me. We didn't talk about it at all. It just happened to be at the same time. I'm standing there, and I'm looking out at you, and I'm going, you're sick. You're really sick, and I know that. You just celebrated a huge anniversary, and you're struggling with this sort of thing, and I'm looking out at people who all have, I know, not everyone, but I know a lot of your stuff, right? And so I think pastors are uniquely suited to really recognize that when the Christian brothers and sisters are in the dumps, let's just say, for whatever reason, it's time, the analogy I use is it's time for them to be Mary. Just sit at the feet of Jesus, let other people take care of you, right? And then when you're in a better place, right? Well, you are now not sick anymore, or, whatever it is. But, that couple that just celebrated an anniversary, their husband died. Now they were Martha taking care of you, Mary. Now we do it the other way around, right? And so within the church, there's songs like, how we shouldn't, I think Casting Crowns has one, like, take your mask off at church, right? And that's good, but I think this is a bigger context in that. We're here to build up and support one another. Sometimes that means you're the one doing the building and the supporting. Sometimes it means that you're the one on the stretcher just beat to nothingness, or you're just struggling. And guess who gets to pick up and support you? It's the people that you did the other day. Or it goes the other way around, and you come. I mean, there have been a number of people, I won't use any of their names, but there have been a couple of people who have come in as visitors to this congregation and have been destroyed by the world. Some of them in ways that you guys, that like shock me when I hear about them. And then I'm talking to them a year later, and they have been built up by this congregation, the love you guys show. I mean, this is me patting you all on the back. And now they're able to show that love to other people who were helping them out, but now they got something going on with their lives. It's a truly amazing thing. So I guess just know this. When you come to church, you don't do it just for you, right? When you're in a rough place, this is the best place to be, because you have brothers and sisters in Christ to pick you up. And when you're feeling good and everything's wonderful, well, guess what you get to do? Someone is hurting in that congregation every week. Every week. Most of the time I know who it is, because I hear about it.
The true presence of God at the altar with us.
Well, right, exactly.
That's just like the most wonderful, amazing, overwhelming to think about gift to celebrate with brothers and sisters. Is just.
Well, this is why we share the peace, right? One of my favorite things to do, and I tell people this. Bill, I think I told you this when you had your leg stuff going on, right? If you need to sit in the pew and have me bring communion to you, let me do that. That's one of my favorite things to do in church. Don't tell able-bodied people that. But there is something apostolic about me walking out of the chancel and bringing communion to someone. And I know that people get embarrassed about it.
Oh.
They shouldn't. But I know people do get embarrassed about it. And I keep telling them, like, you're doing me a favor, right? That's good for my soul. It encourages and lifts me up just because I'm able to fill that role, right? There's something deeply pastoral about it, right? Same with bringing communion to someone in the hospital and that kind of thing. It's those times that you're like, well, I don't need to question why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's pretty self-evident. And you guys get to do that too in a less well-defined way, and you guys do. Like, don't hear this as just law. You guys do a good job with this. This is an encouragement, right? To keep that up and kind of recognize that that's part of what being the church is. Any questions or thoughts? All right, wonderful. Well, then let us close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right, thank you all. I will not see you next week. You're welcome to come to church. The only thing that's going on is probably handbell practice. So you will get voluntold. I will be, by now I'd probably be back in, pray that I'll be back in Georgia. I'm coming back up for the pastor's conference. So it ends Wednesday at like 11. So it's down in Daytona. So like I said, I better be back by 8:30. But
have a good trip.
Well, thank